So part of using AI and using ChatGPT and writing a prompt is we wanted to provide meaningful participation for our students that have intellectual disabilities or some form of reading disability to be able to participate in the classroom environment. So we're going to take a look at using this strategy of the 4 C's to adapt a prompt for ChatGPT. And the reason why we want to do this is so that we can provide meaningful participation with same age content area text that our students and their peers are using. So we want to be able to take the text from the science class or from an ELA class or cultural studies, whatever the student is in. And we want to be able to give them the materials so that they can have meaningful participation. One of those strategies that we can use, as I mentioned before, is looking at these 4 C's to adapt the prompt. And this is really going to help us create this prompt. So we have context, and that is really going to be for the learner and looking at that content area. Concrete, who that learner is and what type of supports they need. Customize, what are those adaptations that we need to do to the content area text? And then always we want to confirm and whether or not those adaptations align. When we're doing customization, we can use the acronym of ADAPT, which can help us really think about the pieces that need to be customized by either aligning the learning targets and our goals and our lessons. We want to make sure we do that we want to determine or develop or define what those key vocabulary are. We want to adjust that language. Maybe we're adjusting the vocabulary, the text structure, really to that reader's, students' learning level and their reading level and their comprehension level. And then we want to personalize it, that we want to really take into account that student's interest and engagement. And then tailor, we want to make sure we assess for understanding. So if we adapt all this content, but we're not adapting an assessment, that's going to be challenging for the student. So let's go in and take each one of these step by step. So we're going to take a look at an example. We're going to pretend that I am a high school teacher and I'm teaching a class on disabilities, okay? And so I have my text. So here's my context. I'm a secondary teacher, so I'm putting the context for the AI to understand who I am and what I'm doing. I have my objective. So here is, we're reading this article excuse me, to learn more about the perspectives of a student with disability. The students are to come to class after reading the article, and we're going to discuss key aspects of this text. And I also want to let them know, again, in this context, that I have a student with an intellectual disability in my class. So concrete example in who the learner is. So I want to give a really precise example of who my student is. My student reads at a 3rd grade level. Maybe you have more information. Maybe you have a Lexile level. Maybe this is where you can put in, as I did, experiences the greatest success in reading when the sentence is less than 7 words in length, right? So that's what I know. My present level of performance of my student is this. So I can put that in. But if you have more information, maybe you have, my student is non-speaking and uses AAC. My student uses 2 words, can combine 2 words to communicate using their AAC. My student knows 10 letter sound correspondence and can do CVC words. So really, this is the area where you want to say who your student is. And you also want to be able to just, and here's the original text the student's going to be reading. And now we're going to customize the adaptations, right? So I want to have simplified language. I'm going to have that with a specific reading level, which I've done, and I'm going to put some details of my interest. So I wanted to break that down a little bit more. This is going to look And when I was doing, I'm like, boy, this is really long. Like, there's a lot of information here. And then when I thought about it, I'm like, okay, once I do this once, I can adapt this prompt to be able to use with a bunch of different materials, right? So let's say I, as a teacher, or I'm the therapist, I really put in the present level performance. I know what my student is. I know where their functioning is and their ultimate area that they're learning. I know my learning targets, that I can then create some prompts that I send out to my general education teacher. Hey, this is where they're at. Here is the prompt with all the pieces that you need. You can adjust this part and this part to make the materials for your student. I'd be able to use this prompt, send it to my paraeducators and say, this week, here's where our student is learning, or this month, or this year, whatever level you're at. Here's where our student is when you're in science, when you're out in nutrition, when you're in math. Here's the template of the prompt that I need you to use. So spending a little bit of time now and putting this in, again, the more detail that we give the large language model, that we give AI and ChatGPT, the better the output will end up being. So refining it and thinking about it and doing the work ahead of time really helps to be able to get the output that you're looking for your student and for your learner. Okay, so align. So here we go. Please help me create the materials that align with the above objectives. I don't have to say it again. We can just say that. Like a good IEP, we're going to write it a couple different times. We want to make sure that the prompt and that AI knows exactly what we want to do, right? So we're going to look at the following accommodations for my student with intellectual disabilities. So here's what I want to do yet, right? Key vocabulary. I want to extract 10 key vocabulary words from the original text. Then I also want you to modify a list of similar vocabulary words. And I'm just going to say it again at that third grade level. And I'm going to adjust. So how do I want to adjust this? And this is going to look different for all of your learners, right? Earlier we said, is it simplified text? Is that what we're just doing? Do we need repetitive lines? Do we need visual supports? What do we need to put in here? So for us, we're going to modify the text in a simplified version, right? That beginning at a third grade level. We want to make sure that our simplified vocabulary words from above are going to be in the body of the simplified text, right? I'm not going to go all this work of doing and picking vocabulary words and that they're not in the text. We want to make sure that that is aligned. It also helps to make sure that the cohesion and the cohesiveness of what is being read by within the original text stays in our modified text, right? Because I could modify this and all of that meaning could go away. But if I'm keeping these vocabulary words, right, from the original text and I'm adapting them and asking it to make sure that it's in the modified text, I know that meaning is going to stay similar, right? It's already implied in its input there. I want to make sure that I know what those are, and I want to help my student by bolding those vocabulary words, right? And then I also want to keep 3 original key vocabulary words into the original text. So for me, that's important. We're working on that. We're not just working on modified vocabulary word at a third grade level. I want my student to be able to recognize some of the vocabulary that their peers are recognizing within the unadapted text, right? In that original text. So I want to make sure that I keep those in there. And now personalize. My students really interested in learning about disabilities and helping others to learn about theirs. That's an important piece to them. And so now how do we assess the understanding? So I'm going to create a maze comprehension assessment, and I want to use 7 of the simplified vocabulary words, right? I want to assess at that modified version. We modified the text, we modified the vocabulary. I want to make sure that we're assessing that, but I also want to assess 3 of the original vocabulary words. And if I was really wanting to, I could say these are the words I want you to assess, right? If there were really specific words that my students need to learn, I would be putting that up above, like make sure you have that. But for me right now, I'm comfortable with trying to find out what this is. And then in the maze, I want to know what three options, right? I want them to have three options to choose from. And I'm just going to make sure, like in the research, we're seeing that we want to make sure that, and this can be important, right? If I give two options that have nothing to do with the text, they have something to do with a whole nother subject, like that is not challenging my student. So I want to have some control over this. So I want that word to be syntactically similar. I want one word to be found in the text, and then also the correct word. So a total of those three options. And I want to make sure that this assessment is in that maze type of format. So I want to make sure that that's in a paragraph form. And then because my learning target before was that the purpose of them reading this article is to come back and talk about the text. So my learner needs to have some starters, some sentence starters or conversation starters. So I'm going to be asking for that to happen. If I had an AAC user, maybe I would say, and they're putting 2 to 3 icon sequences together, maybe I would say start with an icon sequence starter, like start with that, right? You can customize this to anything you want. So here's my example prompt, right? Then I put it all together. And here is my text, my original text. And here's my prompt. So we're going to go here. This is the free version of ChatGPT. So here's what happened. It said, here's my 10 vocabulary words. Here's my modified words. Here was the simplified text. Here was my maze comprehension assessment. Put in here. Look, they even highlighted the words for me. That was great. And here are my sentence starters. When I went back and I took a look at all of these pieces, I felt very confident about how it was modified and how it was adapted, and the vocabulary words that it chose. I was very confident and I was very happy with those pieces that it did. Like, this makes sense. This is great. The maze comprehension assessment pairs to the text that I had. And then these sentence starters for participation and discussion, those are really great. Those are going to be helpful. Now, my students' paraeducator can practice with some of these before we have class, and they can be ready to go, right? They can have meaningful participation within the general education environment. And this took seconds to create, right? And now that I have that prompt, my paras I can send that out and they can do this before their classes.